firstly just going to start us off here and just go ahead and acknowledge that budgeting is a very broad topic. So there could be a lot of different reasons why you may have joined us today. And so maybe you're just starting out and trying to build a budget that fits your real life, not just this ideal life of a budget. Maybe you're in a new phase, in a career shift, growing family. Maybe you're nearing retirement and the system isn't working like how it used to. Or maybe you feel like you're doing okay and you just want to get some confirmation from us on the way that you're budgeting in this specific season of life. So, no matter where you're at, budgeting is not a one-time event. We always say it evolves with you. So, today we want to spend about 45 minutes, maybe less or so, talking about how to find the right budget for your phase of life and why having a plan matters at every single stage. So, John, with
Let's
that,
do it. Yeah, 45 minutes. I'm famous for making these things last longer than they need to, but it's a lot to unpack. So, if you are joining us today, obviously, like my anticipation as I look at even some of these names, I know that you're multiple steps ahead of just the average and hopefully on the better side of some of these statistics I'm about to share, like this one, which is this is the historical national savings rate as of this webinar today. The national savings rate is right around 3.5%. And kind of as you can see, with the exception of like this brief period here during COVID, it's actually never been great. So I know I don't have to explain to you all today that that's not enough to retire successfully. Like prior generations, not only did they save more as a percentage, but they also were able to rely on things like pension and Social Security. And then in preparation for this, I stumble across these like alarming headlines that talk about bankruptcy filings, increasing 12% year over year. And it's a very scary thing to think that the average American is 2 to 3 months of cash flow away from bankruptcy. Like that's an alarming place to be. And obviously you all joining us today, like that may not be your situation, but I'm sure you know others who are there. And this is why we love the budgeting stuff. It's why we enjoy helping here. I mean, of course, it's fun to talk about those exciting things like buying Nvidia stock or like buying XYZ stock and, or taking advantage of market dips. We love that too. But at the core of a good financial plan is a good budget that has accountability. And for my aspiring retirees, this does not stop when you retire. And actually, I think, it's kind of like a split as I look at these names, it's kind of like a split audience of like, we have like our retirees and our Canter Path community with us today, but also some, what we call accumulators that are working towards retirement. I think our retirees with us can attest to the fact that budgeting in those retirement years are actually probably more important than in your earning years. Like when we're earning, we can cover up financial mistakes with more money. Like we can like put things on a credit card and then time it for when a bonus hits and then pay it all off. But in retirement, you have what your portfolio can sustain and what social security can provide. And so this slide here kind of, I think, does a really good job of illustrating that. So the average retiree these days collecting a Social Security benefit can expect their Social Security benefit to cover about a third to one-fourth of their living expenses. So let me kind of explain this slide a little bit. I'll pick on, somebody who had a pre-retirement income of 125K. So what they say is statistically on average, you need about 71% of what you earned during your working years to live in retirement. Part of that's because expenses change. Like we don't have, expenses like our tax bill is lower. We're not saving to our 401ks and things of that nature. And so in this instance, you can see about 29% of your Social Security is expected to cover those expenses, and that leaves the rest of the portfolio, what you've saved, hopefully to do the heavy lifting. And by the way, this number is slowly eroding here. 10 out of the last 15 years, we've seen cost of living adjustments in Social Security not keep up with inflation. And so that just means less purchasing power for what your Social Security benefit can be and more responsibility than ever to watch your spending, which is a problem for all of us because like we're conditioned as a society from a very young age to spend money on things. Right, Raina?
yeah. And speaking of that, like John says, society has primed us for this buy now, pay later mentality. Now, Of course, there are times where there's really no other option, but ultimately we are conditioned to make choices that don't benefit us, but instead benefit others. Now, take one of the wealthiest people in the world, for example, owner of Louis Vuitton, worth 2.08 billion. Yes, that's with a B. And did you know that Louis actually saw soaring profit margins from 2020 to the 2021 pandemic? And why, you ask? Well, for one, great marketing. And of course, that benefits the company and their shareholders. But the main reason, though, is that while some use stimulus dollars to infuse their savings accounts or invest, many use them to spend. And so there is a big difference between acting rich and achieving wealth. The point being, we care so much what people think of us, and unfortunately, we're kind of told to feel this way. So, back to this buy now, pay later mentality. The problem with paying later nowadays is that the average credit card APR right now is somewhere between 18 to 24%. That means if you're carrying a balance, you're paying a pretty significant amount on the money that you are borrowing over time, and that interest just adds up. So, the question that we're all asking is, how do we fix this, John?
With the scariest word in finance, budget. No one likes to use this word, and I get why. But for a brief moment, I just kind of want to illustrate and explain what I think happens in most instances of people's day-to-day cash flow and budgeting. And I know this was my wife and I for years as well, and so it's just kind of normal. Like you've got obviously, your main checking account that you've set up, right? And that main checking account is hosting that money that's coming in, whether you're earning or if that's Social Security and pension and portfolio earnings, but it's receiving that money that comes in. And then on a month in and month out basis, you pay the things that like you couldn't put on a credit card. So, you pay for your mortgage or your rent or property taxes. These things are coming out on a recurring basis out of that checking account. But then like everything else, Raina, like everything else for people is going on their credit card, like all the discretionary day-to-day spending. And the problem is, it's not going on just one credit card. It's like, oh, we got to open up like that Costco credit card to get points, or we got to open up, to get mileage and flights and all that stuff. So we open up multiple credit cards that our spending is going going on. And then on top of that, we're also writing checks still. I mean, it's not as common as it was 10 or 15 years ago, but like we went to a friend's baptism a few months ago. We wrote a check as a means for the gift for that baptism, and they didn't cash it for like 90 days. So it hits my account, and I'm like, oh gosh, like went to Jackie and I'm like, hey, check this out. Like, do you remember what this was? And she's like, yeah, that was the gift. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. So now you're shuffling money in and out of your savings account to cover for a check that you wrote 3 months ago that you budgeted for back in November, but now it's February and that check comes out. And so you've got this kind of like chaotic system where you've got one main account that really can't handle the load of all these different moving parts and pieces. And then on top of that, or what ultimately happens at the end of each month is that checking account runs empty. It runs out, and we're kind of just like buying time for, when it gets funded again because, we get paid on the first of the month, or Social Security hits on the third Wednesday of every month or whatever. We're waiting for that thing to happen. So until that happens, we put everything on credit cards. And it makes sense why, when our checking account runs on E, we max out these cards, or we don't max them out, but we're carrying a balance. And the average American is carrying a $6,300 balance on their cards right now. So yeah, like imagine trying to create a budget when you're like stuck in this real-time chaos. It's one of the reasons that budgets fail, and because they fail so often, it's one of the reasons people associate budgeting as like with this negative connotation. It's applying this very reactionary static thing to this chaotic system. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that it would fail.
Yeah, and so John and I just want to take a second to let's just all imagine a scenario where instead of the confusion of the dollar transfers all over the place, kind of what John just talked about, you can actually create accountability within three very specific accounts that you set up. And so John is going to unpack some key terms here. If you're taking notes, I recommend maybe writing this down. But the three F's that we're going to focus on here are fixed, flexible, and future.
Raina, I have a couple clients on here that have done this with me and they do their budget like this. This would be fun. We should turn on their videos and make them do a testimony. Just kidding. I won't make you guys do that. Okay, so so like that slide I showed a few moments ago, this isn't all that different. Like you have your main checking account. We all do. That's where money flows. Now, I bet you know with a high degree of predictability like what your fixed expenses are. And if you don't, we're going to share our template later that outlines just about everything that could or should exist as a fixed expense for somebody. But I suspect, like many, that they are not all coming out of one place. Some are auto deducted maybe from your checking account, but maybe others go on a credit card. And so the goal here, and this is kind of the first like big change up that we try to apply when we're doing proactive cash flow planning for clients, is to prioritize these fixed expenses to be coming out of your one account, your fixed account, that main checking account. And I already know what you're thinking. What about my credit cards? Like, what about my points? And we'll address those in a moment. And I think this is where the system really is different than the chaos that you saw a moment ago, and it's where proactive and real-time planning can occur. And by the way, once you get really good at this is where automation can occur as well. So after we've accounted for what we know to be our fixed expenses and we've reprioritized those to come out of this, our main checking account, then once a week we fund a second checking account. Yes, a second checking account, which these days, most banking institutions allow you to do that. There are banks that charge fees for stuff like that. We can answer that stuff in the Q&A, but most banks allow it at no additional charge. It's pretty easy to do. So we have a second checking account, and the number that is transferred to this second checking account each week is scalable to your situation. But the idea is to have enough in here at the beginning of each week to cover all of the discretionary spending that you do. Groceries, dining, going out, entertainment, Target and Amazon and Costco, all those things. And like, I'll pick on groceries for a moment because I think it's a really good example. Yes, we all need food to survive. So groceries is a requirement. It feels like a fixed expense, but it is very situational, right? Like if your reserves are low in that particular week, you're probably not going to be buying steak and fish as your protein source. Like you're going to adjust. That is kind of the litmus test of a discretionary expense versus a fixed expense. And so the goal for having this weekly transfer to this flexible account is twofold. Number one, it creates a very physical separation of your required expenses versus your discretionary expenses. And number two, you end up actually living within a real-time budget that sees an account balance being spent down to zero each week from like a checking account, let's say, instead of a credit card balance that's just increasing in value. Like for my family, as a result of doing this, I can tell you exactly how much we spent on groceries last week. I know exactly how much we spent on Amazon because I know how much is going into this weekly number that we're looking at and watching go down each week before we replenish it. And I think that's where we can really start to create a difference for folks when it comes to their budgeting. Until now, most people put these things, and we did this by the way, like Jackie and I, before we adopted this system. I mean, this is probably going on like 10 or 12 years now, but before we adopted this system, this is what we did. We put all of our discretionary stuff on credit cards, which seems fine because it's like what we're taught to do. The problem is, in doing so, you very much you disconnect yourself from the purchase. If I'm making a purchase today that I know is not going to come out of my account, or I'm not going to have to pay for another 30 to 45 days when my statement balance is due, I'm probably not going to scrutinize it that hard. But if I'm like, all right, like Jackie, we've got $162 left in our flexible account this week. Yeah, I'm probably going to think twice before I go and spend on that thing. In fact, they actually did a study on this. Some of you on here have heard me talk about this study, so this isn't new information for you. But what they discovered was that the average family spends around 15 to 20% less per year by not using a credit card. Now, I'm not telling you never to use a credit card. In fact, I'll share in the next slide where my family uses them, but I want you to better understand the psychological impact of being connected in real time to your spending habits. We call this spending up versus spending down. Like you analyze your needs versus wants better if you see an account balance going down, approaching zero, than a credit card statement just going up. And for those of you that will most absolutely reject or object rather, and say like, no, 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 like Raina and John, I pay my credit card off each month. I do it to get the points. Like, I get that. I get that point. But I know, and this is like, I do this for a living. And I know that the psychology of money affects me as a financial professional. And my thought was like, if I can forget 20%, what if I can curb my discretionary spending by even 10%? That's going to far outweigh those points that we get. That point system is designed to get you to do one thing and it's spend more money, and they do a good job at getting you to do that. How are we doing, Raina?
Doing great.
Sweet.
I really wanted you to kind of hit the nail on the head there with the last point about points and credit cards and everything, because I know you brought it up a little bit earlier. And I mean, truly, there is not much wrong with wanting points and travel rewards and all of that. But like you said, that 10%, it really does outweigh, and that is more beneficial. So I'm glad that you put that point home.
Yeah, I think the hardest part for folks is just like it's change, Like it's we're changing the system that we've always done it. And by the way, like if what you do works, then great. Like that's perfect. So for some people it's just, downloading their reports every month and looking at their spending and they're able to kind of stay accountable to that. For me, like my wife and I, we just needed like I very much enjoyed that physical separation and the accounting of these different accounts. And I'll touch on this slide now, the last bucket of money, which we call the future bucket, and how this one in particular is where, we can and do use credit cards. So functionally, I will say like what it looks like, your fixed account is a checking account, your flexible is a checking account, and then like most people, we kind of side card our checking account with a savings account. Like that's normal. Like you go open up an account, you get a checking and a savings, right? And so this future account is actually a savings account in our household. Because I just said this a moment ago, I love the physical separation of different accounts. It's a series of accounts. I'm embarrassed to say how many it is, but I will share it. I will share it in a little bit. And this is not your emergency savings. Like I want to be clear about that. This is an account that we're squirreling money aside each month to accrue for items that we know are going to pop up in life, but they don't happen as frequently as like needing to go get gas. So like for our family, it looks like, a new car fund. It looks like maybe if, family vacation spending for the year or gift giving in the holidays. Like that's honestly like gift giving is a really great example because I think everyone on this call like feels that pressure when holiday season comes up. We know we're going to spend more money. It's coming. Like every single year it's coming. And then we do nothing about it. And then we're like in November, December, or we're sitting here in January and we're like, oh, new year, we're going to reset the budget and like put that behind us. That was kind of chaotic. And so for us, like we set a little bit aside each month to get ahead of what those expenses look like. And like I said, the same thing for vacation. We know like the annual amount that we want to spend on some trips that we want to take or what have you. So rather than like event occurs, that purchase happens, and now we're trying to figure out how to pay that off. We are slowly saving and escrowing leading up to that point so that we're not surprised when it happens. So we're breaking that expense up over 12 months and self-escrowing, and then we have a savings account earmarked for it. So I know, like, Raina, this is where people think I'm crazy, but I have 13 different savings accounts. I see. I wish I could see like everyone's faces as I'm saying that. But it's again, I believe in the benefit of like the physical, tangible separation of accounts that have a different intent that helps me plan better. Some folks will just say, "Hey, we're gonna have one main bucket, but we're gonna know how much we're gonna allocate to each one." And this is where, for me and our family, credit cards do play a factor. So as I've said, I've been kind of like an advocate for like cutting your credit cards. Not really, but for not using them. This is where like if we're booking a family vacation, the hotel stays, the flights, the going out when we're there, like all that's going to go on a credit card. I just pay those off immediately from that appropriate account. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense.
Any
13's a little
questions up till
crazy,
this
but
point? What's that?
I said makes sense. 13's a little crazy, but
Well, okay, so it
everybody
is.
has a method.
Yeah, what I would say at this point of the conversation is that it is, so some of you have probably heard of like the 50/30/20 budget. That's like a really, like if you just Google that, that's a very common vernacular for, okay, we're going to say like 50% is going to be our fixed expenses, 30% is going to be our, discretionary, and 20% is going to be our savings. So this is kind of like an adaptation to that. But really, like truly, if you think about what this is, it is a digitized version of the envelope system. Like it's like what I grew up on. Like it's like you every week you've got X amount in this envelope for this spending, for lunch money, for whatever. Like that's kind of what this is. And so for the folks that have done the envelope system or have done some of like the Dave Ramsey courses over the years, it's this, but fast forward to 2026, we're kind of a cashless society these days. And so we needed a way to keep up with that and still have those mechanisms of accountability. And having these different account types, I think, are huge. Honestly, the biggest one, even if you don't, I mean, obviously, escrowing for big one-off expenses is important. But like Raina, I mean, I'm curious from your standpoint, like, how did this, like in your household, like creating the separation of like your fixed static expenses to your discretionary, like, how did that help as far from like an awareness point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously giving you a hard time when I say 13 because I'm probably around like 7 accounts.
Right. It's awesome.
So about half, but I think specifically for like gas and groceries, I was lowballing it for sure, not
Yeah.
realizing, okay, how expensive
Mhm.
it actually is, especially as those prices just keep inflating. And so that was a hard reset for me. And it allowed me to kind of see as my flexible account was going down, I was like, I mean, I'm not driving as much. How am I not having enough money for gas? I just wasn't allocating as much towards it, like it needed more because it was simply more expensive and I just wasn't giving enough towards it. So
Yeah.
hard reset, but for
Well,
me,
let's talk. Can we talk about that? Can we talk about
yeah,
like what was the experience of, because obviously, as you know, like step one is writing it down. So, like, how was that for
yeah,
you and Patrick?
yeah. So, I mean, for me and hopefully for everybody else here, I mean, what we need to do is create awareness, write it down. And so this shouldn't be an exercise of shame. It should be an exercise of awareness. And so if you haven't done this in a long time, I really recommend maybe just revisiting it unless the system works for you and you're doing great. Perfect. But John actually has a screenshot here of a Google template that he built out, and it is amazing because it has a lot of the calculation automation already built into it. So when you type in subjectively what applies to you here, it will add it up and
Mhm.
kind of total everything. Yeah, I wanted to see those different tabs. So at the bottom, you have your fixed, your flexible, and your future that you can type in. And everything that's already there is kind of just like sample data and ideas. But of course, whatever applies to you, you can fill in. And then on here, you have the cash flow summary as well. So to kind of take all of that information from the previous three tabs and give you a rundown on this page. And so just before we move on, that QR code to the left there, that is access to this Google Sheet if you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah. And then obviously, for everyone that's on this call with us, has a my path dashboard that they can go in and do it, but which we'll talk about too. But we recommend the actual exercise. Why do we
Yeah.
recommend that?
We always talk about kind of getting your hands dirty, that the writing it down and the tracking it complement each other. They do not stand alone. So being able to write it down allows you to kind of sow the seed and then tracking it inside of MyPath, or if you have another app, that's great. But we recommend MyPath, which, by the way, if you're on MyPath, Perfect. If you're not and you would like a login to this for a free financial dashboard to help with your spending and budgeting, we can absolutely send you over an invitation. So make sure to send us a chat. But aside from that, what I was saying was kind of sowing the seed with writing it down, and then tracking it is like the automation afterwards, making sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's here. So we just want to make sure that you know that those things are separate, but they do complement each other and they can kind of help propel you forward afterwards.
Yeah, I like what you said there. I mean, I think that if I go back to writing it down and why that's such a necessary part of this
Mhm.
is like the example that I gave before, like when we were planning for this was like I'll ask you ChatGPT to write up my workout for the day. But like I still have to lift the weights. Like it's like I'll look at it, I'm like, oh, this is a great workout. Like this is so cool. And that's, in some ways, that's what like with my path, like it'll do a lot of this stuff for you and it'll monitor your expenses, which is nice. But you're never really like you kind of have to lift the weight and you'll never really connect to it, what that spending actually looks like, or at least have like, here's what we want it to look like and then have something to size it up against so that when you're comparing what you wrote down versus what's actually happening as your MyPath dashboard is reading it, like how close or like how far off are we? So it's interesting because over the years I've had clients use their MyPath dashboard exclusively and that's how they do their budgeting, which is great. It's better than doing nothing. But I think a lot of folks these days like they just want to have an app that can come in and do it for them. And the truth is, that's really hard when it comes to because those are your daily spending habits. That's your decision making. Like I'm thinking of myself like after this, like, am I gonna go to Chipotle and get like a burrito bowl or like should I just eat at home today? Like it's your habits. And I think writing it down really does create that level of awareness. So as Raina said, if I go back, let's see, one more slide, you can scan that QR code, and then that QR code, can you see this? The Google Sheets that
Yes.
I'm sharing.
Hmm.
That QR code will just drop you to this, and you can actually save this Google Sheets. And then maybe this is something like what I would love is like this is something that we work on like in the next meeting or maybe like in between meetings, like just email me or like we'll schedule like a quick update call and then we can work on actually putting the bones of that together. Because again, as I said at the beginning of this, like a good financial plan is predicated on having this stuff down really well. A couple other things as we're wrapping up today, which did a really good job, by the way, 31 minutes in. Nailed it. A couple other things as we're wrapping up I want to mention. So these are just like rules of thumb that Raina and I live by, and we preach a lot when it comes to the work we do with our clients. Number one is simple. It's clear, and obviously there's caveats to this, right? Like most people need to finance a mortgage to buy a home or finance a car to have that vehicle. But I think I'm more talking about this consumer debt that looks like things that are going to go on a credit card that we're carrying a balance for. Really, if we can avoid doing that, we should. So, never finance anything that's not going to pay you. Consider the 24-hour rule, which in our household, basically, if it's any expense over a certain amount, we pause for 24 hours before we make that decision. Part of the idea is to kind of, excuse me, just disconnect you for a moment long enough to go like, is this a need or is this a want? Like what, like I don't want this to become an impulse buy. Let's give
Yeah.
ourselves one day. And then last but not least, as what we've talked about a lot so far is the physical separation of your fixed and your flexible expenses. Like anybody can do that. You can open up a second checking account and you can start, maybe you don't need 7 or 13 savings accounts like Raina and I have, but like having those two together where you can separate them out is a huge game changer. Raina, how do you do the 24-hour rule?
Yeah, I was gonna pause you there for a second, but the 24-hour rule, I feel personally is subjective. Like John said, he has a certain amount, and that amount, I don't know what that is for the Kennedy family, but it can vary. It can be anywhere from like $100 to $500 to $1,000, whatever that looks like for you, whatever stands for a big purchase. Then you give yourself a set amount of time to think about if you want or need this item or this service. And so For John, like you said, 24 hours. For my family, it's more like 72, just because I know I personally need to practice patience a little bit more. So we kind of give ourselves about 72 hours to really think about if this purchase is a want or a need and how we are going to go about making that point of purchase as well.
Yeah, I love that you've adjusted the time length because it's like an honest assessment of what you actually need to give it to make it a good decision. And I mean, everyone on this call has experienced buyer's remorse. That's like the worst feeling. So, the hope or the ambition with this is like a hard and fast rule for folks is to separate you from that feeling of buyer's remorse a little bit. Just like consider it as a need versus a want. So like as you said, it's scalable to you. Like for the folks listening to this, like make this 24-hour or 72-hour rule be based on a number where you go like, ooh, like that hurts a little. Like if I just made that purchase and it was a wrong purchase, that hurts. So it's probably not $50, but like what is that number? And then, kind of try to use that as a good rule of thumb. Now, we've got, as I mentioned, I think kind of like a split crowd of retirees and pre-retirees, or what we call accumulators. So, if it's okay, I just want to switch to a different slide for a moment and talk about something that I think is really, really important for the families that are in growth phase, that are working towards retirement and accumulating. I think everyone should know what their savings rate is. This is not going to apply for you retirees. I got a slide for you next, but like everybody should know what their savings rate is. And the goal that we preach a lot as a firm is 20%. And that's a big number, but that's just a goal to work towards and build towards. Like you don't go to the gym and run a marathon day one, you train, you build, you work towards it. And this is not different. So like the idea is, okay, well, if I know what my savings rate is, then how do like whatever that exercise of awareness, whatever that percentage is, let's say it's 12, how is a performance-based increase or a merit-based increase or a bonus, like how am I going to take that and apply towards it so that I can grow it over time and try to get that number to 20%. Notice what I did not tell you to stop buying lunches and not go to Chipotle like I want to after this or get coffees or go on vacation. I'm not saying that because I don't think that's practical and you'll just hate me if I tell you to do that. Like that's not a practical, like, you need to live life. But I do think that 20% is an important savings metric for the accumulators in life because, again, as I showed at the beginning of this, even with Social Security representing 1/3 to 1/4 of what your expenses are in retirement, a lot of it is is the responsibility of what that portfolio can and should grow to. And I'm going to do a little bit of time value money math for just a moment for fun, but this is an illustration of $7,000 invested every year at 7%. I'm not showing you this just to show how good time value money is. I actually want you to see this to acknowledge like how hard it is to save that first 100,000. It takes 10.2 years to get to that first 100K, but then something important happens. The next 100K only takes 6. And then after that, the next 100K takes about 4 years. So after about 10 years, your money starts doing some of the heavy lifting for you. And that is the magic of compound interest. But this can't and won't happen if you're not saving. And it's really hard to save money or to know you're saving it in the right places if you don't even know what your savings rate is. So I'm showing you this as an effort to implore you to know what your savings rate is and message me after this if we want to work on that together to get to that. Yeah, go ahead, Raina.
And also on the spreadsheet that we gave a QR code for, we didn't touch on that tab, but that is also part of that. So once you input all the data, it should spit out the savings rate for you there too.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, let me actually, that's a good point. So it's actually on, so like steps one, two, and three are all about the budget. And then step four of this spreadsheet is a summary of like your inflows of money that's coming in. And then again, for those accumulators, we can kind of punch in what your savings and tell you exactly, like it'll tell you exactly what your savings rate is. I think really truly that's something that everybody, should benefit from knowing. And then for our retirees that are on this call, I want to chat with you for a moment as we're wrapping up. Life is way different when you're retired. I'm not retired yet, but I get to like vicariously experience this through you all, as does Matt and Michael and Brandon. Like we get to see what it's like in working with our clients. And you may never have seen a slide like this from us before, but I think it's a good representation of how we view every client portfolio. So, like, we know market volatility is going to occur. You know that as well. And this is a really good premise for how we view your cash flow needs that ultimately inform what your portfolio construction looks like. So, for example, obviously, when we talk about the inflows that are coming into that main static checking account, well, we know that that's a combination of your Social Security benefit, pension if you have that, maybe some real estate income if you have some rental properties. And then the rest of it is being backfilled. That other 40% of need at those beginning charts that I showed is coming from the portfolio. And so for the folks that we serve, we want to ensure that we have about 1 year of assets in a short-term type of account, whether that's money markets or short-term securities like short-term bonds that we know are steadily and reliably available to send you money each month to your checking account. And then you can have the confidence to know, oh, okay, I'm 1 to 2+ years away from my income need affecting the more intermediate invested assets in my portfolio that have a slightly higher risk tolerance. And furthermore, I'm actually 3 years away, 3+ years away from pulling on any type of growth investments from my portfolio. And the idea here and why I want you to visually see this is to give you the confidence that even amid a recession or even amid, a highly volatile market that we may experience at any given time. And by the way, we've had like 5 bear markets in the last 7 years. These things happen. We want you to know that those buffers are in place to protect you so that you can kind of rely on, when we're doing all this retirement and cash flow planning and retirement, like your number is not fluctuating with the market. Because that's like a very old school mentality. Like back in the 80s and 90s, what people would do is they'd live off of their dividends. So if their dividend was lower because the asset value was lower, then they spent less. And if it was higher, they'd spend more. And so we want to kind of smooth out that ride and then give you the confidence to know, like, yeah, there's market volatility, but I'm 2, 3+ years away. So as long as the market recovers before I need to start pulling, moving those assets down the line from long term to intermediate to short term, I can feel a confidence that I'm protected. And by the way, next month, Raina, I don't know, I don't know if we know the date yet, but next month we're going to be doing a Retire Ready webinar that'll be for the folks that are kind of segueing into retirement or just retired, where we'll talk a little bit more about this, and that'll be led by Brandon Hatcher. So it's more fun stuff to come for our retirees.
Yeah, definitely. That'll be next month, and there will be a newsletter that will go out, kind of like how you received for this one. Or if you found this on social media, you can find the RSVP link there. And so, just as we're rounding out today, I have a few more resources to give you. So just hang in there with me for just 1 second. So right after this, you're gonna get clicked into a survey. One, of course, just asking like, make sure everything was technically fine here. But then also, if you have any follow-up questions that you'd like for us to specifically reach out to you about, go ahead and jot that in there so that we can get that survey response and be able to respond to you within 24 hours. Shortly after, you're also going to receive an email, and in that email, it will have John's Calendly link if you decide that you want to book an update call to be able to chat more about this, especially after you fill out the template for anybody that is interested in using that. That will be a great time to meet with John quickly and briefly to just kind of run down that information, make sure you're on the right track. And then here, obviously, you'll see a couple things. There's that Google Sheets QR code again. If you didn't get the chance to scan it, go ahead and scan it now. John mentioned a little bit earlier about that kind of spending up versus spending down mentality. And the Above Board podcast, our most recent podcast episode was actually on that specifically. So you can find us on any streaming platforms to be able to learn more about that. And then last but not least, if you or anybody you know really wants to dive into their budget more, we really just covered the like cash flow kind of section of this, but there is way more information and Q&As and things to apply inside of our free online course, Your Money Story app. So thank you all for taking the time to be here today, learning more about your budget. Hopefully you're on the right track. And if not, totally fine. That's what we're here for. And yeah, we're just super grateful. We hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, have a good day, everyone. See ya.